Driscoll from Syracuse University, and in the interest of full disclosure, the Skaneateles Lake Association, I'm actually on the board of the Lake Association, as you heard. Welcome, and as Bill said, we view this meeting as a conversation, and we have a bunch of people who are collecting data, making measurements, and at some point, this is going to have to be coordinated through a 9-element plan. And so if you look at the program, we're expecting, well, actually a whole crew of folks to potentially comment on the 9-element plan. So I think our vision was to try to get all the players, or as many as possible, and we may be missing people. I think that's important to think of. There are other people out there that should be invited and should contribute. But to look at what we're doing, and look at whatever we have been doing, what our plans are for at least the next year. And is there overlap? Is there redundancy that we want to eliminate? And probably more importantly, are the things that are slipping through the cracks, critical measurements, critical pieces of information that we're going to need to try to implement the 9-element plan. Now, I don't want to get and talk about the 9-element plan. We've got folks who are going to do that as part of the program. But the idea is to talk briefly about your work and what you're doing and what your plans are. And then in the afternoon, we're going to have a conversation about the overall operation, the coordination, whether it's useful to have future meetings, the possibility of having a common database, what are our rules that we should operate by or whatever. So just an effort at coordination. So I appreciate everybody's interest and willingness to come here and to be part of the conversation. Okay, so I'm going to give a short overview of sort of these two components that we're involved with, dealing with sort of external inputs to the lake, and I want to acknowledge my colleague from the university's fellow who's working with me on the tributary work, and then also we're doing work on sediment characterization, and Chris Schultz is helping with that. He's also in the Earth Science Department at Syracuse. Some of you saw my talk last week at the Finger Lakes meeting. I prepared this slide, which illustrates some of the measurement efforts that are underway. So as Bill said, we have a series of smaller or minor tributaries that we're monitoring for a citizen science program. This is to supplement the major tributaries that Upstate Freshwater Institute has been monitoring for a couple of years. So it's hard to tell, but they're slightly different colors. Actually, the Syracuse ones are in orange and the Upstate Freshwater are in yellow. Dave's going to talk a little bit about the UFI program. I mean, the idea is ultimately to look at these together and to integrate these and to come up with some ideas on the mass loadings to the lake. That will be a challenge in itself. So as I said, we've got 8 minor tributaries. A few of these have multiple sites in them. We're looking at a suite of analytes focusing primarily on nutrients. Those of you who know me, I'm not really a phosphorus person, but I have a lot of interest in other analytes, so we're not going to go over these other things that we're measuring, but just to let you know we have a lot of other things that we're looking at the tributaries at. And then we have some preliminary discharge estimates from support from USGS. Doug Burns, who's been helping us with estimating the tributaries. Many of these sites, in fact, virtually all of them are engaged. We have like some gauge measurements, not very long records, and then Svetlana is putting in flow measurements in some of the other ones. The other thing that I want to point to is we are measuring atmospheric deposition in the watershed. This was sort of a happenstance. We have a tower here at a station actually in this building that we've been measuring for years to look at urban deposition for inputs to green infrastructure such as the green roof. If you wander around the building, you'll see the green roof. So we decided we needed a reference site. So we put it in Skaneateles Lake and we measured some things. And lo and behold, we measured phosphorus going in, and it's higher than I was anticipating that it would be. Anyway, so this just, yeah.
Quick question, Charlie, on the 8 tributaries.
Yeah.
Would you consider those surrogates for the 143 tributaries that are coming in the lake or not?
Well, I think this is part of the reason for having this conversation, because we They have a distribution of land cover. I mean, it's generally a mix of forest and ag land cover. Some of them are in more developed areas, so there is, you know, some areas where there's some folks, some homes. These are just a summary of the data that we have just for one analyte, total phosphorus. So these are just to give you an idea. So they're highly variable in space and time, which is not terribly surprising. And as I said, some of them have multiple sites, like for example, Dowling Creek is the site of a remediation project that's underway by the Lake Association. So we have a site above and below the site of remediation. But these are mostly just prior to coming into the lake. So just for your point of reference, for those of you who are uninformed, the lake concentrations are extremely low, on the order of 5 micrograms per liter. So these represent, I mean, they're probably not hugely high values, but they're moderately high values. So anyway, so I'm just showing, this isn't really meant to be a technical presentation, it's just to tell you what we're doing, so I don't want to go over this. One thing that we're interested in, and these are just our observations, but we want to couple these with the UFI observations to look at different patterns to try to, in answer Bill's question, to try to take relatively few sites that represent a relatively small fraction of the overall watershed and extrapolate it to a whole watershed budget. So this shows a not as strong as I would like relationship with one of the analytes, soluble reactive phosphorus. These are the concentrations with ag land cover, just as an example of that. I mentioned that we're measuring atmospheric deposition. This has been going on for a few years. This is a site near Mandano. It's only one site. We measure bulk, which is, as the name implies, just a funnel collecting everything that comes out of the sky, and then a wet-only collector right here, which is similar to what is used for the National Atmospheric Deposition Program, which is a wet-only collector. So we've been measuring phosphorus in a number of analytes for a few years. Just for those of you who are uninformed, the lake surface is a relatively large fraction of the watershed. About a quarter of the watershed is the lake surface. So if you look at the loadings, this is just rough stuff, so I don't want anybody to get animated. These are the loadings for wet only and bulk. So you can see that the bulk number is a lot higher, suggesting that there's a lot of particulate matter coming in, not surprising because of the ag land cover. And these are our initial estimates of total phosphorus loading from the 8 tributaries right here, these values. And I'll give these slides to anybody, so you don't have to worry about writing these numbers down. And so, we have to do the extrapolation, but if you do the back of the envelope calculation, it's not insignificant atmospheric deposition. So, just to let you know. Okay, so then the other thing that we're doing, as Bill indicated, is this sediment survey. So, a series of transects of superficial sediments, upper 2 centimeters, along the shelf area primarily of the lake. And so there's a series of 17 transects positioned around the lake. Some of them are proximate to tributary inflows, different land cover positions, different slopes. We consulted with Mike and others at RPI, and they asked us to move some of our transects over in the north end to try to accommodate some of their measurements, and we tried to accommodate them. And so we went out and we collected these surface sediments, and they are in progress for analysis for physical characteristics. This is 130 samples, pore water phosphorus, total phosphorus, nitrogen, carbon. We will even do a few trace metals here and there, and grain size analysis, various physical characteristics to get an idea. What is the spatial heterogeneity of the phosphorus in the system? Is it in the sediments? Does this look like an issue? And then what is the size? What is the potential for maybe resuspension of this or mobilization from the sediments? So this analysis is in progress. We have a few, just a few measurements that we have done, and there are many more that are in the pipeline. So these are phosphorus concentrations right here, and you can see these transects right in here, and the size of the circle is proportional to the size of the phosphorus, okay? So this is a work in progress. We're trying to get this done. We have a couple of other activities that are planned for the future. We, with the help of Bob Warner, we collected a lot of macrophytes, and those are being processed as we speak. I was in the lab yesterday, and they were getting all prepped and ready to go. And there are some issues in terms of how we would measure those, but the idea is to measure the quantity of phosphorus in the macrophytes, because those plants are going to take up phosphorus as they start to grow, and then as they die off, they're going to release phosphorus. So get an idea of the dynamics of macrophytes. Is that a significant portion of the phosphorus dynamic of the lake? And then the other thing that we have planned with guidance, hopefully, from Dave and Tony, and also Kim Schultz of UFI, is to look at the sediment release of phosphorus into the water column. So we would like to deploy flux chambers at key locations guided by the sediment survey. We are interested in phosphorus concentrations. We're interested in also mussels. Mussels have been implicated as being important areas of high mussel density, low mussel density, maybe proximity from shore. If you look at these maps, many of them show very interesting patterns of phosphorus concentration moving from the shore out to the shelf area. So to try to get an idea of actual measurements of sediment water exchange that could possibly go in and inform modeling efforts. So this, I think I've pretty much said this, but basically to continue the monitoring and then finish the analysis of the sediments and the macrophytes, and then do these flux chamber measurements. Those are our plans over the next year or so. So, are there any questions? We want to have this discussion later. I don't want to get involved in a long discussion, but are there any questions about the mechanics or things that we're doing? And then we'll just go through everybody, and everybody will say a little bit of what they're doing, and then we'll have our conversation. So, any questions?